High School is the 10th episode of the second season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Halvorson, and there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode. It's definitely a decent episode, but I didn't completely love it. There were some parts that I found not bad, just not that interesting, but as a whole, I quite enjoyed it. So there will be spoilers from now, as I said, and it starts off with Ray and Debra arguing about who's going to pick the kids up. Neither of them wants to do it. And then Marie and Frank come over and suddenly they both want to go and do it. And Marie comes over with some cookies. And it's a nice way to start things off. Cut to the next scene. It's a little while later, not too much longer. Robert comes over and he happens to mention Ray's upcoming high school reunion for the 20 years. And Ray hasn't mentioned this to Debra. He doesn't want to go, but now the cat's out of the bag and Debra really wants to go. So they end up going. And I did like the setting of the reunion. I thought the setting was good. The lighting was good as well. Sometimes with these dance scenes, TV shows can sometimes make it a little bit too dimly lit and I find it hard to see. Or it's quite bright and not very realistic. This one, I think the lighting was spot on. And I didn't really care for it, to be honest. Other than that, visually, yes. But in terms of being funny or interesting, not really. Ray was talking to two of his friends. The conversation between them was kind of stale. And I feel like that's kind of the point. It's not meant to be that interesting. They don't have cool anecdotes from their youth. And two of the guys in their lives are not exactly as high-flying as Ray's is. So I feel like that's the point. But it also comes across, and I didn't find it interesting. Debra then meets a character called Jessica Bell. And she was very much the one that everybody had a crush on. And she gets on well with Debra and they go dancing and Ray is forced to sit with people he didn't get on well with at school. He was forced to sit with the popular kids, put it that way. And it felt awkward. And again, I feel like that's the point. Ray feels awkward, so we the viewer are meant to feel that awkwardness. But feeling awkward isn't an enjoyable experience. So I feel like it was portraying the right atmosphere, but that didn't necessarily mean it was an enjoyable experience. So I didn't love the scene at the reunion, even though I do think visually it worked quite well. They then go home, and we have quite a hurtful exchange actually between both Ray and Debra. Ray points out that Debra was one of them, and there's an insinuation there, and then he follows it up by saying popular, but I think that wasn't the word that was in his head. And I feel like he was implying that she was somebody who maybe looked down on people who weren't popular, which of course is not something that we get from Debra now, but maybe at high school she was. And then Debra calls Ray a nerd. And that in itself is maybe not an insult. I feel like I speak for most nerds when I say it's actually a thing that we can be proud of, being a nerd, particularly in this day and age. But the way she said it was very nasty, and it was uncomfortable, but not in a negative way. This bit wasn't uncomfortable in a bad way. I think it was more thought-provoking. Why do these words hurt so much? Why did they have very different high school experiences? Why for Debra is going to a high school reunion a thrilling event, even if it's not her high school? Why for Ray is it something he wants to run away from? And I think it does a great job of highlighting the fact that you can go to the same school as somebody and have a completely different experience, as we saw with Ray. And then the popular kids, well, adults who were kids, they all clearly had different experiences growing up. And I think that is quite thought-provoking. And Robert comes over as well. This is the next day, and Debra tells him about the reunion. They kind of start poking a bit too much fun at Ray. In my opinion, they're taking this nerd thing a little bit too far and almost making it seem like being a nerd is a bad thing, which it absolutely isn't. So I feel like they kind of took it a little bit too far. And then, unfortunately for Ray, Marie came over with some clothes she'd bought for him, which didn't really help with his street credibility. But, of course, Marie was just doing a sweet thing. And Ray asks Debra to dance, and she realises he's doing this just to prove a point. And he explains that she was popular, he wasn't cool. But then she asks him a question that I think, it doesn't necessarily undo all of the nasty things she's been saying, but I think it helps to diffuse the situation. And she asks the question, why did I marry you? Basically, in that moment, explaining that it doesn't matter if Ray wasn't popular. Popularity is not a reason to marry somebody. There are qualities that are significantly more important. And she encourages Ray to list these good points. And he does. He says he's nice and he has a car. And then they start talking like they're teenagers. And I think it was a really timely way for Debra to diffuse the situation. I think she did a very good job there. Again, doesn't excuse all of the things that she said, but I think it was the right thing to do in the moment. And then we end with Ray getting dancing lessons from Robert. I will be honest, it ended abruptly, to the point where I actually started watching the next episode, and I made in my notes, Tupperware party, what's the relevance? And then I realised we'd moved on to the next episode. So I did feel like it ended a little bit abruptly for my liking. Also, the next episode has a pretty interesting beginning, but we'll get there when I watch it in its entirety. So this episode isn't perfect. There are some moments that are just kind of stale, but there are some good bits as well. I think high school has some important messages. And also the fact that I felt uncomfortable, not just with Debra making fun of Ray for being a nerd, but also for Ray insinuating that Debra was maybe not the nicest at high school because she was one of the popular kids who kind of don't pay attention to people who are beneath them, and I'm putting that in air quotes. And that hurt as well. I mean, it didn't hurt me because I was never one of the popular kids. But the whole name calling and things, it's not great. But I think if it was comfortable, that would be a problem. So some good bits, some good messages. Not a perfect episode, but ultimately, high school was not too bad.